On this Friday night, Ontario's snap election confirmed. Why Premier Doug Ford wants a vote 16 months early.
We need the largest mandate in Ontario's history.
And the criticism against what he's planning to do during the campaign. Trade barriers between provinces.
It's almost absurd.
The pressure to eliminate them as Donald Trump's tariff threat looms. Deadly and destructive, the ferocious storm hammering parts of Europe. And the blossoming trend of growing your own food.
It's literally almost from across your dining room.
Why more people are digging indoor gardening.
Global National, reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Ontario Premier Doug Ford made it official today. He confirmed he's dropping the writ next Wednesday, sending provincial voters to the polls at the end of next month. Ford says he's seeking a stronger mandate to tackle U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats. But with Ford's progressive Conservatives already wielding a majority government, he's receiving political scrutiny from more than just the opposition. Colin D'Mello has our top story tonight.
Months of speculation ended with confirmation.
We will be calling the election next Wednesday.
Premier Doug Ford will visit Ontario's Lieutenant Governor early next week to dissolve his majority government and ask voters for an even larger seat count in order, Ford says, to effectively battle U.S. President Donald Trump.
And with a strong mandate, we will be able to fight with Donald Trump to make sure we stop the tariffs.
The progressive Conservative sources say have been searching for a reason to call an election for the better part of a year. Then Trudeau's impending resignation and Trump's inauguration provided the perfect backdrop. Ford has donned a new Captain Canada persona, hoping the tough talk will translate into an electoral landslide.
There's potential here for rallying to the flag and rallying behind Doug Ford, so he may be reading this very, very well.
But opposition parties are pushing back on the Premier's reasoning. The Ford government has a healthy majority and support from the opposition to spend billions of dollars to respond to the economic impact.
I still believe it's an unnecessary and expensive election. It's going to cost voters $175 million.
And questions are being raised about what the Premier can and cannot do during the election.
Every single day during this election, I'll still be Premier.
Ford is pledging to still meet with the Prime Minister, still represent Canada's premiers, and still travel to Washington twice to meet with U.S. lawmakers. Critics say that is not his place.
Doug Ford will be a small player in the interactions with Donald Trump. This will be entirely the federal government response.
It's a battle that'll play out over a month-long campaign. Voters go to the polls in Ontario on February 27th.
And Colin D'Mello joins us now. So, Colin, with Ford about to call this election well over a year before he's required to, what are some of the risks and rewards of his decision?
Well, Doug Ford's progressive Conservatives are certainly riding high in the polls thanks to that Captain Canada persona that he's donned lately. At the same time, the federal Liberal leadership could draw away resources from Ontario's Liberals, hampering their efforts during this election campaign. But political watchers, Neethu, say there is a tremendous amount of risk here for the government. For example, what happens if Donald Trump's tariffs don't come to pass on February 1st? What happens if Ontario voters are more interested in provincial issues like healthcare and housing rather than the United States? And what happens if one of those opposition leaders has a shining moment during a debate? Those political watchers say there is a lot that could happen over 28 days that could turn an election campaign like this on its head. Neethu.
Queen's Park Bureau Chief Colin D'Mello. Thanks, Colin. Donald Trump once again threatened to introduce a 25% tariff on Canadian goods today, while claiming the U.S. no longer needs to rely on this country's exports. The repeated comments have Canadian politicians ready to retaliate if necessary. And they've reignited a movement to reduce Canada's reliance on the U.S. by knocking down inter-provincial barriers. Touria Izri reports.
The beer flows freely at this Ottawa brewery until you get to the border with Quebec.
Literally, we're a stone's throw away from, a whole other market that could help the business out, but unfortunately, we can't do that at the moment.
Matt Tweedy has been in business for 10 years and says inter-provincial trade barriers haven't changed.
But I don't see a better time than right now.
Right now, the existential threat of U.S. tariffs is renewing calls for Canada to look inwards.
It's almost absurd. We're one of the most trade open nations on the planet, and yet we can't trade with ourselves.
Regulations vary from province to province on a range of products, like alcohol, milk, tires, and until recently, even first aid kits.
Over time, I think from a protectionist perspective, different provinces have tried to protect parts of their own industries at home from competing markets right next door.
That means businesses often trade north-south instead of east-west.
It's easier to move a truck to the U.S. sometimes than from Atlantic Canada to Ontario.
The Canadian Federation for Independent Business found removing internal trade barriers could add $200 billion to the economy, while another study from the International Monetary Fund says it would boost Canada's GDP by 4%.
It's a no-brainer that we need to get rid of these trade barriers.
We make it so difficult to do business with each other.
This has been going on forever, and enough's enough.
The premiers and the prime minister agree it's a major priority and are encouraging Canadians to support domestic businesses. But until it's easier to buy Canadian than buy American, that could be a hard sell. Neethu?
Touria Izri in Montreal. Thanks, Touria. The mayors of Canada's border cities are uniting to oppose Trump's tariff threat. Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkins, who chairs the Border Mayors Alliance, says our two nations have never faced a circumstance that so profoundly threatens our shared economy. And the alliance has already begun identifying alternative supply chains. The group met last weekend and hopes to serve as a unified national voice on the issue. Days after Donald Trump took office, hundreds of illegal migrants were flown out of the U.S. on military aircraft, beginning what the president calls the largest mass deportation operation in American history. Trump says the deported migrants are hardened criminals, but there's no evidence to corroborate that claim. Jackson Prosco reports.
Military deportation flights are the most visible sign of Donald Trump's hard turn on immigration. Up to 80 Guatemalan migrants were removed from the U.S. by Air Force transport Thursday. Though similar flights happened regularly under President Joe Biden, Trump's decision to use military aircraft is new, part of a strategy that will also see thousands of troops deployed to the border. In Juarez, Mexico, dozens of Mexican migrants were also returned from the U.S. Everyone is getting caught. I don't recommend to cross, says this man.
We're getting the bad, hard criminals out. These are murderers. These are people that have been as bad as you get, as bad as anybody you've seen. We're taking them out first.
It's not clear what specific crimes the first Trump-era deportees committed. In Boston, immigration enforcement raids unfolded in a residential neighborhood. In Newark, New Jersey, a raid on a business swept up 3 undocumented workers. Several U.S. citizens were also briefly detained by ICE authorities.
None of these people were rapists or murderers or criminals. The problem with it is that ICE went in there without a warrant.
Despite all the bluster, the pace of deportations is so far on par with what unfolded during the Biden years. Trump has promised to go further. Mass detention camps and sweeping raids are expected in the coming weeks.
ICE has overreached beyond what should be constitutionally allowed.
Protest as they might, local officials have little power to stop what's coming, leaving immigrant communities to fear their American dream may become a nightmare. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
The U.S. president spent time in North Carolina today assessing the ongoing cleanup after last September's Hurricane Helene. While there, Trump proposed eliminating the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. He suggested federal funds for cleanup and rebuilding should instead be sent directly to state governments.
You want to use your state to fix it and not waste time calling FEMA, and then FEMA gets here and they don't know the area, they've never been to the area, and they want to give you rules that you've never heard about. They want to bring people that aren't as good as the people you already have.
People working to rebuild say they're frustrated at the slow pace, and some feel they're stuck in crisis. In Ottawa, the race is on to determine the new Liberal leader and Prime Minister. Former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland is busy trying to make the case for why she should replace Justin Trudeau as competing frontrunner Mark Carney keeps gaining momentum. And there are less than 50 days left in the campaign. Mackenzie Gray reports.
Bonjour. Chrystia Freeland wanting to see more of her new political rivals.
It's really important to give all Canadians a chance to see the candidates in action, to hear what they have to say.
The former finance minister pitching there should be 4 Liberal leadership debates, an average of 1 every 11 days during the truncated race, doubling the 2 the Liberal Party has promised.
Thank you.
Would Canada become a failed? Despite wanting to debate, Freeland did not take questions from reporters.
Why don't you come to Shawinigan? It's a great place.
But Mark Carney's next high-profile endorsement did. A source telling Global News, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne is set to back the former Bank of Canada governor this weekend.
I think as a nation, we need to be more ambitious. We need chin up, elbows up. It's a different world.
The energy around the leadership translating into new Liberal Party members.
We're looking at, I think, over 700 or 800 new members.
Support not just for the big names.
They always make fun of me for being a long shot on this.
Nova Scotia MP Jaime Batiste appreciative of the help he's getting for his leadership bid.
I've had more than a dozen of my caucus colleagues helping me with calls over the past 3 days.
That enthusiasm seeing MPs who said they weren't running again under Justin Trudeau now changing their mind. The latest, New Brunswick MP Wayne Long, who led the charge to have Trudeau quit, saying he'll run if Carney wins, but won't if Freeland does.
She's too tied to Justin Trudeau. She's been at his side. She's defended him.
The push for candidates to sign up new members is now down to the short strokes, with the Liberal Party requiring folks to join by January 27th, Neithu, to be eligible to pick the next Prime Minister.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mackenzie. The federal government is threatening to review its business relationship with Amazon after the retail giant said it's closing its warehouses in Quebec. On Wednesday, Amazon confirmed it would cease operation of all 7 of its facilities in the province. At least 1,700 permanent workers would be laid off. In a letter addressed to Amazon's CEO, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne says the decision raises questions about Amazon's commitment to Canada. Champagne invited the company to reconsider the shutdown, or he'll be forced to review the relationship that exists between Amazon and the Government of Canada. Federal purchases of Amazon products and services is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Canada Post has announced it's receiving $1 billion in federal funding to help with financial challenges. In a press release, the Crown Corporation says its cash reserves would have depleted by the second quarter without the money. It says this will help continue operations, but not help with structural issues. Canada Post has faced billions of dollars in financial losses in recent years because of increased competition. Israeli troops will be sticking around in Lebanon longer than planned. Coming up, what's behind the delayed departure and what it means for the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. A huge fireball erupted when Ukrainian forces hit a Russian oil refinery. Ukraine fired a barrage of more than 120 drones targeting that depot, as well as Moscow and a factory producing missile components and other weapons. The new Gaza ceasefire has been in place for almost a week now. Today, Hamas revealed the names of 4 more hostages scheduled to be freed tomorrow. 4 female Israeli soldiers are expected to be released in exchange for 180 Palestinian prisoners. The women were kidnapped from an army base in southern Israel during the October 7th Hamas attacks. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his forces will not be withdrawing from southern Lebanon on Sunday, putting a November ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah in jeopardy. Israel says Lebanon's army has not yet replaced Israeli troops stationed in the country's south. Redmond Shannon reports.
Residents of one town in southern Lebanon finally head back home, or to what's left of their homes. People were expected to return to other communities this coming Sunday, with Israel scheduled to fully end its occupation of the border area as its troops sweep for Hezbollah arms and bunkers. But on Friday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the withdrawal from Lebanon is being pushed back until Lebanon's army is ready to fully replace Israeli forces. The delay does not seriously threaten Israel's truce with Iran-backed Hezbollah, according to this analyst.
I think this is, a delay of maybe a few weeks, not more, maybe a few days.
Paul Salem believes Netanyahu is under pressure from US President Donald Trump to get out of Lebanon soon.
He doesn't want it to break down and have to face headlines of another war in the Middle East in his first month in office.
Hezbollah was severely weakened by Israel last fall, making a large backlash now less likely.
Lebanese politics has taken a turn against Hezbollah, and the Saudis in particular, but others as well, see an opportunity here.
Foreign ministers from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait visited Lebanon this week, offering support to the country's new leadership.
And there is now a prime minister and a president, both of whom want Lebanon to assert sovereignty over the state.
Stability now key as Lebanon tries to recover from last fall's hugely damaging war. Redmond Shannon Global News, London.
Coming up, the Federal Fisheries Department scraps a controversial quota plan. Large waves and fierce winds lashed the coast of Scotland as Storm Eowyn hit. In Belfast, a trampoline was picked up and tossed over a fence. Wind gusts reached more than 180 kilometers per hour. At least one person has been confirmed dead after a tree fell on his car in Ireland. About 1,100 flights were cancelled, while others, like a British Airways jet in Manchester, struggled to land. The federal government has abandoned controversial plans to redistribute quotas in Atlantic Canada's lucrative elver fishery. The move was designed to combat unlicensed fishing of the baby eels, also known as elvers. Harvesters warned it would put their livelihood at risk. The fishery set to open in about 5 weeks. As Heidi Petracek explains, there is still uncertainty over what this year's season will bring.
But the last few years has been ridiculous.
Mark Weldon has fished baby eels, known as elvers, for 30 years. Already working full-time for a harvesting company, he didn't want the quota Ottawa was offering for folks to go solo.
If they're going to offer me quota, I was going to take the quota and give it back to my boss because they run it better.
See, Weldon doesn't have the expensive infrastructure needed to keep the tiny eels alive en route to markets in Asia. At the same time, the federal government's proposal would have slashed his employer's quota 80%. After months of industry outcry, the minister's office suddenly scrapped the idea late Thursday.
We're extremely relieved that DFO has chosen the right path and canceled the project.
Tensions over First Nations exercising treaty rights, along with rampant poaching and violence, forced the fishery to close the past 3 years. So Ottawa has new regulations this year requiring not only a license to harvest, but to possess and export elvers too, along with rules to prohibit combining legally harvested elvers with illegally caught ones in the same container, all meant to bring illegal fishing under control.
The way it's being fished now, there'll be nothing left.
The federal government is still moving ahead with reallocating harvest to First Nations, which means commercial fishers still face quota cuts.
We're still losing 50% of our business, 50% of our quota for greater Indigenous access without compensation, which is definitely a problem.
Even the First Nation representatives have said that's not fair and it's not the way it should be done. They should be compensated for any quota that's being taken from them.
What's yet to come upstream is up to the DFO as the start of the elver season approaches March 1st. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Bedford, Nova Scotia.
From closet to table, the food revolution being embraced by a leading Canadian seed company is next. In Canada, winter is hardly considered growing season, but a well-known seed company in Manitoba is attempting to shift that perception. Melissa Ridgen explains.
So this is very young, but...
What is it?
Basil.
It's the dead of winter in Winnipeg. Nothing grows in these parts at this time of year, but a seed company and a hydroponic company are changing that, partnering in the indoor gardening movement, a growing trend to reclaim our food reduce reliance on produce grown in Mexico or the United States, and the environmental toll of transporting it. Then there's the ever-increasing cost of produce in the grocery store and often declining quality.
If there's a growing problem, the demand is still high, but if the supply drops, the price is going to skyrocket. With a system like this and growing your own produce, you know exactly how much it's going to cost you.
Indoor gardens start around $1,000 and go to $5,000, sometimes even more. But with that, you gain the ability to grow specialty lettuces, heirloom tomatoes, microgreens, peppers, even berries year-round. Big ticket items in stores if you can even find them.
If you were to look at this in the grocery store, we're probably looking at probably $300 worth of produce in this particular growing setup.
While the farm-to-table movement gets a lot of attention, this trip is even shorter.
It's literally almost from across your dining room or out of your kitchen right to the table. It's significantly closer even than farm to table.
It's part of this care home's plan to use innovation to get back to the slow food movement.
We had a lot of residents who have typically gardened, and when they come here, they lose that ability. We also were looking at strategies around food and dignity and around meaningful recreation.
Exactly how TNT Seeds began nearly a century ago, now combining the old ways with new. And while this indoor gardening trend began in luxury homes of the rich, it's now marketed to the middle class.
You could kind of get creative and just make this be like an art piece in your house too, really.
Yeah, like how sexy is this?
Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
Interesting. That is Global National for this Friday night. Tonight's Your Canada. These seals in New Brunswick, yes, it's a real photo, and no, they're not sporting quirky hats. They're biodegradable markers, part of a Quebec study to help researchers keep track of harbor seal colonies. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great weekend.